Hi, I'm James Hamilton from Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal, and today we're making a mobile plywood storage cart that also functions as a panel saw. There's an angled side that supports a full sheet of plywood where you can conveniently break it down using a circular saw and an edge guide. This whole thing is made from common construction lumber, and while I use a table saw to trim the edges from my boards, you can build this without a table saw at all. I've made a set of plans with all the measurements you'll need to build this. You can find them at the link below this video. Now let's get started. I built this one assembly at a time, cutting the 2x4s and 2x6s to length, and then ripping off the rounded edges. I'm not sure I really need to rip off those edges, but it removes any rough surface left at the mill, and I think it makes them look a little nicer. In the end, I'm actually building with 2x3s and 2x5s instead of 2x4s and 2x6s. Each assembly is put together on the floor because I don't have a bench big enough for this yet. I'm using construction screws and making simple butt joints. This base is assembled from 2x5s, but I use one of my 2x3s as a spacer so I can be sure that the distance between the two pairs of inner rails will snugly fit my 2x3s later when I install the next assembly. Now is a good time to install the big 6-inch casters. I considered adding blocks so that I could secure the casters with 4 screws, but the heavy flanges on these things make them really sturdy. I think 3 screws will be fine. I do, however, wish my casters locked. I may replace them down the road. Because these corner joints will take all the weight of the loaded cart, I replaced the shorter screws I originally had with 3 long screws, just in case. And I'm using construction screws, not regular drywall screws. These are stronger. Several of the boards on the next 2 assemblies have their corners trimmed off to keep them out of the way. The taper doesn't really matter, but I started about a foot from the end, and I brought them down to about 1 inch thick at the points. I originally planned to do it on the bandsaw, but I found a circular saw was faster and it gave me a nice straight cut line. I tried to keep each board square to the rail across the end as I worked, but this isn't a precision project, so I wouldn't fret over it too much. This lower rail sets 5 inches from the end of the boards on assembly 2, as it's noted in the plans. That way, it will rest on top of the base assembly while the protruding ends slip between those rails that we used the 2x3 spacer to set earlier. I try to keep this assembly plumb as I drive in the screws, wherever I think they may be needed to secure it in place. It's not going to be perfectly rigid, but it will be strengthened as we install the next assembly. This assembly is labeled number 3 in the plans, and it's pretty straightforward. More screws, more butt joints. The lower rail mounts about 4 inches from the tapered ends, and now it's time to install. I made this easy. The lower rail near those tapered ends just sits on the base, and the slats from both assemblies mesh together. Drive some screws here and there to keep everything solid and secure, and you're ready to start the last assembly. This one slips between the remaining rails in the base and is screwed in place with the slats flush with the underside of the base. This divides the 2 sections of the cart in half, one for full sheets, one for partial sheets. The next step depends on your height. Reach up the slanted side of the cart and without stretching, mark the height of your wrist. Then measure 48 inches down from there and place another mark. That is where you should mount a series of small 3/4 inch thick blocks, one on each slat at the same level all the way down the cart. Now we can use the cart to finish the cart. Get a sheet of plywood and sit it on the blocks you just installed. We're going to make a rip and a cross cut so you can see how it works. Then you can use the process to cut the plywood pieces that you're going to need to finish the cart itself. My plywood was a little bowed, as is pretty common with inexpensive plywood, so I used a couple of clamps to flatten it out. That's another feature of this cart that's pretty handy. To rip a sheet, measure from the top edge the width of the piece that you're going to need, and then add an offset. That offset is the distance between the saw blade and the edge guide. I keep a little scrap of wood with my new cart that's equal to that offset, so I don't ever have to do math. The edge guide aligns with the marks that you made, and it clamps to the panel. Remember, you're aligning it with those offset marks, not your original measurement. I set the depth of my saw cut so that it goes just through the plywood. I don't want to cut deeply into the cart itself, but a little scoring line won't hurt it. If you use a good blade, you'll get a nice clean cut. Making a crosscut's a similar process. Lay out your measurements, add the offset using your little scrap, and clamp the guide in place. I position the cut between two of my slats so nothing interferes with the guide. I highly recommend you cut from bottom to top, because as you make any cut with the circular saw, the blade guard retracts. You don't want to finish the cut down near your legs with that guard retracted and gravity pulling the saw down towards you. Once you cut your plywood, you can add some pieces to the base of the cart to support the panels you load in there, and I slap a final piece on the front to create a little lip. How much plywood you load in this cart depends on how heavy you want to make it. The heavier it is, the harder it will be to roll around. But the cart itself should be pretty strong. As you can see, I've loaded mine up pretty well. If you'd like to build your own handy plywood storage and cutting cart, check out the plans in the notes below this video. Who says you can't get track saw quality cuts from a simple circular saw? Bora Tools' new WTX clamp edge guide system is light, it's easily portable, and it's far less expensive. And with the optional router and jigsaw attachments, the system's more versatile too. Check it out at the link in the notes below this video. Wait, don't go yet. If you're new here, please subscribe and remember to ring the bell. I would really appreciate that. Give us a thumbs up, or better yet, leave us a comment. I always read them. And be sure to check out the latest issue of Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal. It's always packed with tips, tricks, and tutorials designed to make you a better woodworker.